Fantastic. I'll do a little intro and then...
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. As always, I'm your host, Taylor Moorey, and obviously I have a little bit of a cold, which is a great voice for doing an old Jewish mother, but hey. I'm having a terrible time concealing my pathetic fanboy hard-on, and I swear to God, if I stand up right now, I'm going to flip over the table. I'd like to get right to my special guest. We have Vancouver music legend, metal god, self-proclaimed guitar nerd. He's fronted bands and projects such as Punky Brewster, Strapping Young Lad, the Devin Townsend Band, and Casualties of Cool. He's worked with Steve Vai, Jason Newsted, The Wild Hearts, Guar, Zimmershole, Soilwork, Gojira, Isan, Revamp, and more. His most recent releases being Ziltoid Live at the Royal Albert Hall and Casualties of Cool with a live DVD from Union Chapel in London. Man who needs no introduction but got one anyway, Devin Townsend.
Nice to be here. Thanks, Taylor.
Thanks for coming out.
No worries, man.
I guess one of the things that I want to ask you, I know the way you write is a really emotional process. It's kind of where you're at in your life, and sort of the records fit that theme. When you go back and play stuff in your back catalog, is it hard for you to go there, or does it kind of become something different?
I think it's anything that's from the back catalog is almost like not an act per se, but in a sense you're because you've already resolved what it is that inspired those moments of creative passion. There's an aspect of it that I'm disconnected to, I think, or at least there's more like a nostalgia thing. If you're singing, for example, about I don't know, for example, if it was an ex-girlfriend or something, it would be a very similar experience. There's an aspect of it that you had an intense emotional connection to, but in another way, it's finished, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, like when, for instance, like when you did the Retinal Circus, it sort of, you were able to detach for songs like Detox or Love or something.
In a sense, I think you're detached from it in terms of its initial, what it meant straight out of the gate. But in that circumstance, I wasn't detached from the songs just because it meant a lot to play Strapping with Jed and without Gene and Byron, right? So there's an aspect of that was tenuous, I guess. But ultimately, it's music from the past, and it becomes a lot more of a athletic experience than an emotional one, where you're just trying to do it right. And there is a certain way, I think, muscle memory kicks in, and you can perform it in a way that live is interpreted very similarly to how it was.
Okay. That was a fantastic show. I actually went to London.
Oh, yeah.
And saw that show.
Oh, it's wicked.
That was incredible.
Yeah.
First time to London, so I was like, I gotta go.
That's wicked. Yeah, no, we got a bunch of other stuff coming up in London and elsewhere, but London tends to get the lion's share of the bigger shows right now, just because we know it will sell, and for the expense that a lot of these current ideas that kind of have incurred, it makes sense to at least break even or try to.
Yeah. Has doing bigger shows, like, because you've done By a Thread, Retinal Circus, the Z2, has it become kind of easier? Is it like you know how to navigate those things?
Well, I think I spent a bunch of time in the UK in general. I joined the Wild Hearts and moved out there when I was in my early 20s, and our crew is from the UK and management's in the UK. So there's an aspect of it that I'm very comfortable with, which helps. But for whatever reason, the career has managed to have a significant amount of success in the UK. So I just sort of go where I feel it is warranted at this point. The hope is eventually that success would move into other territories, at which point we'd have no problems doing those things wherever. But currently it's easier for us to pull off like a Ziltoid show in London than it is Red Deer, right? So you know what I mean. So
Yeah. Well, that's funny that you mentioned that, because I remember you said something on Twitter, and it was like, it's hard to gauge your success because one moment you're doing a show in like a huge theater, and then the next you're in some chicken factory in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, man. We played in Kingston, Ontario, a couple of years back, and the venue was so small we couldn't get the gear up, so we ended up, instead of canceling it, I did an acoustic show, but I had to stand at the door and tell people as they were coming in that it wasn't the full band.
Right.
And like a lot of the people that were coming there had no idea that there was even a band. So it was, this one lady was just like, I don't give a fuck, who's this guy? And I was just like, oh my God. So, but I think in a certain way, it's like those are the things that allow it to be real still, you know, like current climate, just life-wise and world-wise, it's really easy, I think, to overestimate the value of music and art and things like that, to the point where you lose connection to what it was that drew you to it in the first place. And I think that whatever forces or lack thereof are at work in terms of my own life, having a Kingston, Ontario versus a Wembley or whatever it is it's so bipolar that there's no way that you can take it too seriously, which helps, I think. That way, when I'm still writing about things that are important to me.
Yeah. What are you using to write these days? Because I know you just kind of plunk away on a guitar or something, or...
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of baggage for me with guitar, and now more than ever, because we're releasing, we released a signature guitar with Peavey, but that was a really, it was a really good learning experience for me. And so when I left Peavey, I was fortunate enough to hook up with Warwick and Framus, who have released this new guitar that's, it's amazing, and it comes out for the public next year, and I get to refine it, and it's gorgeous, and it's just awesome, right? And then Fishman, I've got these signature pickups with them, and I work so closely with like Fractal and D'Addario and Dunlop and Evertune and so many companies that now guitar it's like not interesting in a way. And it's not because I dislike the instrument. It's just that it's been relegated in my creative world to the tool that I utilize to articulate myself.
Right.
So when I sit and plunk around lately, I usually just play bass, which is great, except for I don't necessarily play with anybody, and it's not like a melodic instrument to really write with. So I find I need to find a different avenue recently to get these sort of creative moments out. And I got a couple things in the fire. There's a guy on the island that's making a guitar with like sitar strings in it, which would be really interesting. And I got an old telly that I shouldn't use because now I've got Framus. So but I think what do I use now? I mean, I haven't really. I just we start recording the new record in a week, and it's been a whole different process for me. This one, much different than it's ever been. I haven't plunked away on this one. I worked, and I made demos, and I revised demos, and I brought it to the band, and then we massaged it into shape, and then eliminated songs. And it wasn't like Terrier or something where I was sitting on the steps blasted, It's really like, okay, I got to do this, and I got to do it right, and I want it not only to be good for career and band, obviously, but also I want it to be something that I'm proud of. And I mean, God, dude, it was a lot of work.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, different than usual.
Yeah. With your kind of partnership and sponsors and with all these different companies, and the fact that you've now won a Juno for Ziltoid, are you kind of feeling more your place in at least the Canadian industry, or is it kind of catching up to you?
It's catching up, yeah. It's catching up. Plus, I'm getting old, which helps in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been a fan of that. It's not. I don't even know the quote, but to sort of paraphrase the Woody Allen quote of, "If you just keep showing up, eventually there'll be a chair there for you."
Oh, yeah.
So, in a sense, I kind of view the fact that it's catching up more just tenacity than people necessarily understanding it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's just like, well, I've been here for a long time, and
He shows up. Let's kind of.
I've been stubbornly doing what I do to the point where I got a kind of a thing
Yeah.
that it's funny. It's like we'll tour with bands now, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, well, I grew up listening to this stuff, and these are bands that are like hip now, hipper than us in a lot of ways." So it's kind of neat, and I'm happy, man. I mean, it's nice to be in this position now because I think the next record is really good, and perhaps with some of these things coming up, shows that I can't discuss yet because blah blah blah. But it's kind of big stuff, and it could be really cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
With Epic Loud, you said that you were not, you weren't, kind of for the first time, you weren't afraid of having it sort of be like a schizophrenic statement, because there's some heavy parts, some light parts. Do you still feel that way? You kind of over that thing? And
Well, I think in a sense, it's really important for me now to include those types of extremes. When strapping was going, it was so extreme. And then when I quit strapping, I went really extreme in the other direction. And it seemed like both sides of my musical nature were in opposition to each other. And it's taken this time over the past decade to recognize, I think, that they're kind of one and the same. Like extremity of any sort is still extremity. So having them collide on this new Transcendence record, I think, is kind of the point of it. I've always been hell-bent on getting over things and never do, which is the hilarity to it. But in this instance, the thing that I think I'm trying to get past is that sort of sense that those opposing sides of my nature are mutually exclusive. And then maybe in the future after this symphony, and then if I can kind of get something really, like a really beautiful record after that, then maybe it's I don't know, it's nothing, but it's where I'm at.
yeah, no, I get that. What I was curious, what Sky Blue I noticed was very kind of melancholy.
Yeah.
What was there anything in particular, or was
I just
it
didn't want to write. I felt like with DTP, and I still feel it to a certain extent, that I kind of when I ran out of inspiration with strapping, it was also compounded by the fact that it was an unhealthy situation for me. So leaving it was kind of a no-brainer. It was like, well, you're not inspired to make this type of music anymore. Plus, it's not healthy for you to stay in this environment. So leaving that was easy. With DTP, I also kind of hit the point where I was like, well, I'm finished with this. Like, I don't feel the need to say these things anymore. With the 4 records, and then with Epic Cloud, and then Sky Blue, it was like 3 records past its due date. But then all of a sudden, because of the Royal Albert and all this sort of thing, it generates income in an industry that there's no income. So it's foolish for me to not, on one hand, try to continue it. But on the other hand, I mean, I'm like, I've been over it for years now, like 3 years. But as opposed to strapping, it's not an unhealthy situation. The guys in the band are it's not not that the guys in strapping were bad dudes, because they were and still remain good friends, but the scene that surrounded that kind of negative statement was such that it was totally hostile to my personality. And with DTP, it's not that. So it can still fund my symphony. It can still fund all this other stuff. It's not unhealthy for me to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And we're getting all these offers for these great gigs. So I'm like, well, fuck, I gotta think of something here. I gotta, like, how do I make more music? Because Sky Blue was a total pain in the ass to make. I mean, I didn't want to write that one. Epicloud was an afterthought. I didn't write Epicloud thinking, oh, this is like Key or Casualties or something. I was like, oh, that's how those structures go? Great. Here's 10 of them.
Okay, yeah.
You know, and it was like, you know, I'm listening to Maroon 5 and I'm like, oh, that's how it works. Okay, well, let's put my shit on that and see what it sounds like. So both Epicloud, Sky Blue, Z2, that whole scene was just like, it wasn't coming from the same place as how I usually write, which is why Casualties was important to me, because it was, right? But with this new record, I was like, okay, all of these things point in the direction of DTP being something that I should continue, yet I've got no desire to write that type of music anymore. What do I do? What do I write about? How do I make this something that I'm not phoning in? How do I make it something I'm not embarrassed of? And it just came down to, I had to learn to step out of my comfort zone in a way. And so I started exercising and started yoga again and martial arts and talking to the band and including them in the process. So I would bring a song and be like, okay, let's put this together. Is this working? Is this not working? It's all things that it's not me. It's not what I have done ever. I'm like, I just sit and I write and I say, this is how it goes, and then I eat potato chips until I fall asleep, right? So the whole last 6 to 8 months has been so far out of my comfort zone that the music in this record has been so challenging to write, because usually I'll write 10 songs. I'll be, there's the 10 songs, we're good.
Yeah.
But this one I wrote 50 songs and nuked 40 of them, right? And that's like, it's also not me.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, they're good songs, but I've got to the point where I'm like, well, they're not good enough. It's like, if you're really being objective about this, you could put them out and put all your echo and gloss on it, and people might think, oh, it's a cool sound. But I know in my heart that I'm like, it's a song. It's like, I'm so on autopilot now that I can vomit out things that sound like me.
Mm-hmm.
So this whole record and the decision that I made to continue was really based on, you can do it if you really put your mind to it. You have to change your process. You have to change your body. You have to change your mind. You have to change your connection to conflict and all this shit, right? And as a result of that, I think it's going to be a fucking amazing record, right? Who knew?
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
I completely identify with the eating chips.
Totally.
Like, chips aren't my vice. I buy those ridiculous bags of mini eggs, and that's the only thing I
get
do.
them.
But
I get it.
I need my vice without smoking drinks. So
Well, yeah, nor do I. I think that's the thing, is it's like, but it's funny how, in my experience, everything that I take away just reveals another thing that's a crutch, right? Like,
yeah.
You know, I took away weed, and then found I was drinking a lot, so I took away drinking. I found I was looking at porn a lot, and I take away porn, and then it's like, I find I'm eating too much, and I take away, you know, meat, and then it's like, well, you're still eating eggs, and you take away eggs, and then, you know, it's like, so the problem is not necessarily any of those things necessarily. I think it's just how you choose to hide from yourself and your life based on these things, you know, coffee or whatever, right?
I coming from sort of a stand-up world, I'm an amateur comic, and I study it kind of religiously and
Awesome.
all that. And I've noticed that what you're talking about is very similar to how a lot of comics are. They kind of, if they lose one addiction, they kind of move to another thing, or it's all a way of hiding from yourself and
Totally.
and avoiding yourself and
Totally.
things like that. So I can kind of relate.
But I also think it's like, comedy is important as well, because it's one of the last ways that you can actually speak the truth, because it's, Bill Burr or Louis C.K. or any of these guys, it's like they're able to say things that you can't say because it's presented in a way that makes you laugh, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's the same thing with music in a certain way. And I think a lot of, typically a lot of the really high-profile comedians or rather comedic actors have all been really depressive type cats, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, Jim Carrey or Robin Williams or any of these guys. But on another level, it underlines kind of the state of the world. I was thinking this on the way in, where things are so fucked that you got one of two choices. You've got either the choice of going over to everybody and saying, everything's fucked, you should quit trying. That's one option. And I know people that choose that. But I also think that fear is a huge part of the motivation to do that, because like comedy, like music, like anything, it becomes like a defense mechanism. It keeps people away, like anger. Just like, it's all fucked, don't try. But at that point, it's like, well, why aren't you killing yourself? Really?
Yeah.
Because I think that the other choice is, it's all fucked for sure, yet
You can still kind of laugh at it.
well, I'll go down with the ship.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really important for me to make that decision. And when I say, why don't you just kill yourself, I don't mean that well, that's an option. But I mean, the pragmatic part of me is just like, well, if all you're doing is telling everybody that everything's doomed and you're fucked, then the fact that you're still taking the effort to say that means that your reasons for doing that are beyond, the sense of well, it's all doomed. It's just the reasons for doing this because maybe you're trying to test people, or you're trying to challenge somebody to tell you that it's not, because you're terrified or whatever it is, right? But either way, you're not helping. It's like, what, you think we don't know it's fucked? You think everybody doesn't know it's fucked? Shut up. You know what I mean? Come on, dude. It's that just makes you an asshole.
Yeah.
Rather than,
Somebody who's
a
at least
nihilist
entertained.
or something. It's
Yeah.
it's oh, great, sure.
Yeah, we noticed.
Yeah, everybody knows, man. Everybody knows. Great that you're, waving a flag about how fucked it is, right? But in the meantime, we're gonna have dinner. So,
Yeah.
and you're not invited. So,
George Carlin's my favorite comic. He made me want to do it, and I guess I started following you in about 2009 when Key came out. I think that was the first thing of yours I heard, and what I noticed, starting with that and then kind of going into your back catalog and then keeping up with what you're currently doing, there was two things that I noticed. There was one, I think you're like Carlin in a way, because you're able to do all these different things very well, and going what you were talking about, I'm sorry,
it's okay.
about extremeness and everything like that, and how you, but then also just what you were saying about watching the world. It's we know that, and you always said, he said, when you're born in the world, you get a ticket to the freak show. And when you're born in America, you get a front row seat. And then some of us, we get to sit there with notepads and kind of watch and go, oh, did you look at that? Oh, you see what they're doing?
Totally.
And all that. Do you feel that?
Yeah, I take a type of solace in feeling that no one has any clue and no one has any better idea than anybody else, and if they feel they do, it's just a difference in perspective that that defines that, right? But I think ultimately, in light of that, since the beginning, since I was a kid, my only goals, even though I don't think I was able to articulate it in this way when I was younger, although it was the same thing, was I want to get to the root of it. And it's not meaning a life, which I had thought, in my early 20s, that's what it was that I was trying to do. I got past the point where I realized, at least I think I realized, that, well, there is no real meaning. Its meaning is its lack of meaning, and the paradox and blah 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 blah. It's fucking confusing. But it's like, well, what should I be doing? What should I be doing? Is music of any fundamental value? Like, and if it isn't, and then you choose not to do it, is the only reason that you did it in the first place because you're trying to adhere value to yourself? And if that's the case, that's just another fear-based thing. It's like, then everything you've done is bullshit. Well, then maybe everything you have done is bullshit. So where does that leave you? Is your identity so wrapped up in what you do that if it turns out that it's of no value whatsoever, then your life is a waste? And then you feel suicidal about those things? Because if that's the case as well, it's all your ego. You're just so hung up on it all that to surrender to the subtle beauty of life means, accepting that there is no inherent value in it, and that depresses you. Well, then you're a fucking idiot. So what I've found recently is that learning to be quiet, learning to meditate, learning to, not meditate in the real traditional sense, but meditate on, let's change the terminology, to think really, to focus really intently on the subtlety or the beauty or the fact that even in the face of this unbelievable chaotic storm, in the middle of it is like a perfect stillness that's the singularity to all this stuff. It's like, well, if you focus on that, then there's this real tangible sense that, well, that is the only thing that's important. And then how does that practically go into like paying your rent and all that? Well, you go to Edmonton with your family. You go on the water slide, it's like, and then when you write about it musically, then the byproduct of it all is not that the music is what your identity rests in. It's that what you're saying is of tangible and practical value to not the human experience. And with that in mind, you're helping. And that's ultimately what I want to do. I don't want to hinder, regardless of whether or not things are fucked, which they are. I don't want it to be like, things are fucked, therefore I'm going to take and get what I can before it all goes down. It's been a real process of going, it is going down, and you are going to die, and everybody you love is going to die. But within that, how do you react?
Yeah.
So the music has become much more of an end result of a process that I hope in some way helps people in the day-to-day grind, right?
I've noticed you've always had a kind of a grassroots connection to the audience, I think.
Mm.
They notice you're honest, and that kind of reaction is like, well, this guy has never bullshitted us, follow. Has being honest in music always been a conscious decision?
No, I don't think so. But I think that I'm pretty transparent, which helps.
Yeah.
The legacy of it. So even when I thought I was pulling the wool over people's eyes, it's like, it was only a matter of time before people were like, yeah, whatever. I think that the grassroots aspect of it is not rooted in like trying to be charitable or altruistic or anything like that. It's just that all those things that we just discussed and all those things I just talked about in terms of, finding that stillness amidst the storm it's the same thing. I mean, it's like fundamentally everybody's the same, right? Like, so your connection to your audience or your band members or the people at the label or your kids or your friends or the audience or anything, it's like, if what I'm saying isn't totally full of shit, then it's like everybody is the same. It doesn't really matter. Some people have got proclivities in a certain way or can offer things, this, that, and the other, but I mean, everybody's the same. Therefore, the grassroots aspect of what I do is just by default, right?
Yeah. You've said that you're very extroverted on stage and kind of very out there. But you've also said that like kind of joking around and being that way doesn't come very naturally to you sometimes.
I think it does when I'm on stage because what started as a defense, I think, my sort of Fozzie Bear thing that happens when I'm in front of people is typically just like a defense mechanism. If I just talk a lot and rapidly and stream of conscious, then it's like a wall that's sort of impenetrable, and but after doing it for so many years, I mean, you're actually saying it. There's repercussions from everything that you do. So I think it's morphed more into something that is just like a stage. That's what I do on stage, and it's more of an exaggerated version of myself that I feel I'm allowed in that form to do. And I think as long as I'm remaining sober and aware of my intentions, then I'm pretty confident that I'm not going to say something like completely stupid. I might say something absurd, but I'm not going to say something racist or sexist or any of that stuff, because it's just not.
That's not who you are.
It's not who I am, right? Yeah. So it's okay now, but it started certainly as just a defense thing. And when I'm at home and when I'm around people, I mean, there's an element to me that's like goofy or whatever, but I mean, I think I've become much more reserved as I've gotten older, right? That's probably just age.
Is that what you mean when you talk about like accountability in music?
I think so. I think accountability in music extends though to you get a loudspeaker, and that gets bigger as you become more successful. And what you choose to say into that loudspeaker, I mean, it's just, I've thought a lot recently about the presidential races in the States and watching these candidates say the things that they say on both sides of the fence. And that's what I mean by accountability. It's like, regardless of whether or not what you mean is one thing, regardless of whether or not what you feel is your own personal truth versus what gets you attention is another thing. Ultimately, it all comes back to you, like all of it. And I don't have an opinion necessarily on political things, because I mean I do, but it's not an artist's position in my opinion to impose these thoughts on their audience, because what I'm trying to achieve ultimately is to help people, and having an agenda involved with that doesn't sort of commingle for me. But that being said, you see people, and I'm not just talking about Trump, I'm talking about everybody. I'm talking about Sanders and Trudeau and and North Korea. It's everything that you say, it's your world resonates with that. Even if what you're saying is all flowery, if everything you say is peace, love, and flowers, yet you're acting differently in private, it's like it also doesn't work. It's I think that what you need to do is really get to the root of who you are and then say that really loud. But that involves like breaking through it, man. And it's like I can't see myself, but it's so easy to see others. Just like the reason you're saying that is because whatever, your parents were divorced when you were a kid, and now you're afraid of love or whatever. So of course, fuck relationships, and women are stupid and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, for sure. That might be what you feel like you're feeling, but if you really were
if you get
clear,
down to where it came from,
you know where that's not what you feel. Maybe it's more appropriate to say, "I miss you, Dad," or whatever, right? And I think that and like I say, I don't know. A lot of my motivations are still unclear to me, like the majority of them. But I try and be reserved with my opinions because they change so quickly. The more I uncover parts of myself that are causing me problems, right?
I think that's a lot of not exclusively, but particularly kind of a male thing that we like. It's kind of not accepted as easily for like men to express like hurt feelings or something, when it's a lot more expected to like come out as anger or something else.
Well, I think a lot of these things are just rooted in fear. I mean, I think a lot of the male psychology is rooted in fear, and specifically, if you're born a sensitive male, then just for practical reasons, suppressing that really helps. Like if somebody is threatening your family, to not go into fetal position really helps. But you're right in the sense that a lot of what it means to be male is to suppress those sorts of more typically what are thought of feminine parts of your personality. And conversely, if you're a woman and you found that in order, it's practical to accentuate those things that society deems as important to a woman, like your looks or your playing up the weakness angle or whatever like that. I mean, if that works, it's very tempting and rewarded in a lot of ways to subvert your intelligence and your strength and all that, and it's difficult for a woman as well. But in the same sense, it's like my view on gender is that it's the same shit. It's just men and women are the same thing. You've got a different connection to what it means to be human because of what it means to your sexual function. It's like if you're a male, then you have a biological predisposition towards conquering just based on, like inseminating a female or whatever it is. And as a woman, if your biological connection towards child rearing is coming from a hormonal shift that needs protection towards the child, and if you're going to be rearing it and taking care of it, then to get a mate that provides and all these sorts of things. I mean, society imposes all this shit to the point where we're different as a result of those things, but fundamentally, like, men and women are the exact same fucking thing. So it's like, it's so frustrating to be thrust into a position where it's like, oh, I'm a male, therefore
I have to believe this.
I have to believe this shit. Or I'm a woman, therefore I have to believe that shit. It's like, but the unfortunate part of it is society still rewards both of those things, right?
Yeah, that's true. You said about saying things into loudspeaker. Are you?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've noticed that if you pay attention or are weirdly obsessed about it, like I am, about the comics particularly saying things, and it comes back to bite them in the ass, or somebody writes a blog and it gets spread around. But the thing is, it comes from a place that isn't necessarily exactly what you believe, but isn't
Totally.
exactly
I
a
think
joke.
about Bill Burr as soon as you say that.
Yeah.
Because his misogynistic vibe that he's taken, which started as being, like a subtle part of it, but when people glom onto it, all of a sudden, in order for him to continue, it gets more and more and more. Same with Jim Jeffries. It's like, it starts as like this kind of, it's not truly misogynistic. It's not truly racist. It's not truly any of these things. It's kind of just an observation rooted in something that's more practical that people find funny. But then eventually you become, oh, you're the guy that hates women.
Yeah.
So here is 15,000 people. Go. And if you do it well, we'll give you $1 million. It's really challenging, I think, at that point, specifically if you got kids, and a mortgage, and as a male, even woman, of course, the same thing. But as a male, from my perspective, it's like you're rewarded sexually if you provide. It's like a subconscious thing. It's like, then at that point, it's like, well, what do you do? I think that's why you got to be really careful with it. It's like, I saw that with Jim Jeffries more than anything else, because his first special I thought was just like so good.
Yeah.
And then each subsequent one, it got more and more like, that's actually not something that I think is funny. It's more shocking than it is funny. It's put forward in a funny way, but it's also with an air of like despondency. Was it Russell Peters too? It started as like,
Yes.
I'm the guy that's making the Indian accent, and it's funny because I'm Canadian and I'm showing up in a casual shirt, and I'm a funny guy. I'm a little overweight and everything, and then all of a sudden it's like, you're the guy that makes a lot of money doing that, right? It's
Right.
like, I think it's very risky, and I think it happens to all of us, and I think it's money is just such a bitch in that sense. And insecurity, I think any musician or comedian is probably somewhere in their gestation of becoming that. It's like a lot of insecurity. It's like, if I make people laugh, if I make people smile, then it's like, it's like a dopamine rush or whatever.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden it's like, well, okay, well, now you're that guy.
Yeah.
You know?
You kind of get pigeonholed.
You kind of do, and I think by your own hand. And I think it happens to all of us. Or could, at least.
Yeah. Going back to what we discussed earlier about Twitter, when you said that it was hard to gauge your place in the industry because you're playing one extreme or another, I remember very specifically somebody said, like, hey, I was at that, I was one of those people in the chicken factory in Saskatoon, and they were kind of offended by that. But I think it was intellectually at least dishonest, because you should kind of realize what you were saying about that, about your kind of place in the industry and things like that.
It's a fine line, too, because I've chosen to be pretty vocal on social media, where I'll have a thought and I'll try and put it out there in a way that's PC, in a sense. And I'm not doing that because I necessarily am too concerned about being, not offending anybody. It's just there's also a culture of like outrage addiction that social media has encouraged, where people are so willing to be offended and looking to be offended, to the point where it's like this weird thing now where it's the most crass time that I can think of in terms of society in general, yet you can't say anything. But it's not because you can't say anything. It's not because people are like truly offended. Mm-hmm. It's just no one has a voice. So the moment you can be offended, I think people mistake true outrage for just, well, this draws attention to me by saying, you have mortally offended my honor, sir, therefore we must duel. I mean, it's like, have you really? These same people are like, I'm not talking about that instance, I'm just talking in general. It's like, I'm so offended by someone being degrading towards women, yet in private I'm on porn sites, 6 hours a week or whatever. It's it doesn't line up, right?
Look at you, 6 hours a week, you prude.
Well, that's it. Right? But it's like, I think ultimately it's my point with that ramble there is I'm going to run the risk of offending people just by opening my mouth. And I'm slowly learning that not only can I not please everybody, but to do so is going to make any rational person fucking insane, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess I have a couple of questions, but going back to your, specifically to you and your career, and when we met at the benefit for Squid, I don't know that the Kickstarter Indiegogo for John is still up, but it was a benefit for MS, for those who don't know, for your former bandmate. And I noticed that even with an acoustic performance, you still have a lot of, gear and pedals and effects and all these things. What does technology afford you, like, as an artist, as a performer, and do you find that it ever can hinder you in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I think I could do what I do with a piece of shit acoustic and my voice. It's, or just one or the other. I don't think I need any of that stuff, but I mean, I like it. They're toys, and I haven't made $1 million doing what I do by a long shot, but I get toys. So I kind of got past the point where I feel like, the criticisms that I'll get for using technology should outweigh the fact that as a dude, I really enjoy it, right?
Yeah, it's cool to play with, at least.
It's great.
Like,
great.
I don't...
no one needs it, I don't think, but I mean, it's fun.
Yeah. I don't really have any musical abilities, but, like, my brother plays guitar. I went over to his house, and I have a microphone, so I just hooked it up to his effects pedal on an amp, and I was just making noise into it because it was just fun to do.
Totally. I think it's not much different than that, man. It's like, again, it's like people came up after and they're just like, well, you got too much gear. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm setting it up myself. I'm taking it out myself.
Yeah.
I got a buddy who's here helping me, but I mean, I'm putting it in my car.
Yeah.
And I'm off the stage before anybody else was, it's like when they asked me to do the thing, the lady was just like, I know that you probably want a headline and there's a bunch of other bands here that are really good. And I'm just kind of like, let's make it easy. I'll open and I'll take my shit and I'll do it myself. I'll give the guy 2 lines and you don't have to do anything, right? Like, and so as a result of that, when someone came up after, they said, well, you got too much stuff. And I'm like, why does it bother you? Other than you just want to be bothered by it,
yeah.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I'm not bothered by that. So
yeah,
where are we now?
That's kind of the it's all fuck thing you're saying.
Well, that's it. It's like people just, again, it's like some people just really want to be pissed off. It's like, well, you got too much gear. And I'm like, well, how's that bother you? I'm not demanding it, right?
What is the threshold of too much? Like, would you take away one pedal? It would be fine.
Well, I mean, the threshold for too much is how much you dislike the person, I think. I mean, because if somebody dislikes me a lot, me just being there is going to piss them off.
Yeah.
So anything, it's like, oh, well, look at Mr. Pants wearing cable using guitar player, right? It's like, it's like, it's obvious you just don't want to, like, dig my trip. So that's cool, too. So as a result of that, fuck off. Right?
I respect that. Fucking pants wearing cunt.
That's it. Look at that guy up there using cables, strings. What, he's got 6 strings.
You get away with 2 and a half.
Whatever. I know a guy could kill that guy with 1 string. It's like, okay, well, all this points to the fact that you don't like me.
Yeah.
So let's just not talk anymore.
Yeah. No, yeah, I get that. Is writing, I guess you kind of answered this already, but I guess it started as a more insular process and has become more extroverted now that you're working with the band more closely?
Well, I mean, I think when it started, it was probably more to do with girls, But I don't know. I guess if I was to sort of deconstruct it a bit, it's just, I don't think I've ever been emotionally too astute. So having an avenue that allowed me to express things became like everything kind of got hardwired to that. When I was younger, it's not like I didn't want to feel things, but I was either afraid to or found it difficult to express things. So through music, it was a release that I think has been very cathartic, if not healthy, because at certain times it certainly wasn't. But that catharsis was something that as soon as I found something in my life that I was able to release that energy with, it just everything got hardwired to it.
Mm-hmm. I was watching an interview with Mike Patton and Ben Weinman from
Dillinger.
Thank you. And they worked on an EP a few years ago, so they were, I guess, doing a follow-up. And Weinman asked a really good question, and he said, how much of what you do is, because you're a meticulous writer, but how much of it is kind of like a happy accident, like, oh, I fucked this up, but let me make that intentional.
A fair amount.
Yeah.
Yeah, a fair amount. I think that's where the improv comes in, because I do enjoy improvising, but also the style of music and the ways that I've chosen to articulate that it's not like you can improvise in that way. So if I'm doing something and it fucks up, or a note holds that implies something else, I'm very willing to follow those where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very willing as well to follow it to the point where I can accept that it doesn't work and then start again. But those happy accidents are things that are essential. I know some musicians in my life that are brilliant people, brilliant musicians, but have never really failed at anything. And as such, they have a real fear of improv because they're like, well, I'm going to look foolish. But there's certainly something to be said for looking foolish so many times that it's no longer an issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, okay, well, that's what could happen. I could look like an idiot. Well,
Well, that's kind of a strange but understandable fear to have, like, if you're far in your career, because it's like, well, when you started, were you afraid of fucking up, or did you just want to do it?
No, I think I fucked up enough before my career that I had, fucking up 101 under my belt.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it was not like, I was never like a cool kid, and that really helped. Because then it wasn't like, if I was like captain of the football team or something, it would be very difficult to be in a position where, as a kid, that could go away.
Yeah.
Because I think when you're a teenager, you're so insecure that to have an identity like that, like you're, Biff Football.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like to not be Biff Football, to be, whatever.
Yeah. I think I knew a guy named Biff Football.
But that's it. It's like, I think that's when you're a teenager, and it's hard to tell a kid, I would imagine, that like it's a good thing to be talented but not particularly popular, because when you get to the point where you have the opportunity to take chances, I think it makes it a lot easier to take chances in some cases. And that's how it has been for me.
Yeah. I was kind of the same thing, never particularly popular. And like a lot of what keeps me from doing more shows is just like I get in a weird headspace of just like I'm terrified of what will happen, but I can always usually rationalize it away. It was like, okay, you're gonna fuck up. You've done X number of shows.
Sure.
You're gonna fuck up, so you go and do it again.
Well, dude, I lost all of Physicist. I recorded it all on a hard disk, and the hard disk died, so I had to redo it all. And then that whole record ended up being a record that I wasn't proud of, because I just, by the second time, I was like, fuck it, But I mean, I remember at the time, when I lost the information, I remember thinking, this is the worst thing that could possibly happen to me. I lost everything. It seemed incomprehensible that such a creative tragedy could have occurred. But then it's like, but strangely life went on, right? So I think in some sense it's all those things. Anything's a lesson that you choose to view as a lesson. I think you can either view those things as a lesson or as a reason to, kick a rock down the alley and complain that life isn't fair and everything's going to shit, right?
Yeah. What did I want to ask? After, so you finished the 4-album concept of the DTP, and there's now a few years separating you. Do you feel like you better understand your connection to heavy music?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Heavy music is a dynamic. I think in the same way that orchestral music or choral music or chanting or jazz. I think heavy music is like the triple forte on a classical manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be nice to have that more widely felt as being a valid comment rather than the heavy music still being viewed as kitschy by anybody who hasn't done it, which is still what it is. It's like a lot of times you may find somebody that is like in the alternative music scene or has a real emotional investment in being like a true punk or like a learned classical musician that still they find out that you play heavy music and it's Motley Crue, Iron Maiden, sort of elitist sort of thing, which I get, but at the same time, their loss, I think.
Mm-hmm. So what's vying for pole position these days? You have Transcendence that you start recording in a week. Symphony after. Do you have any plans beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, I want to play bass with somebody, but most people just drive me crazy. It's like I'd like to play bass for somebody who has a career and has been through it and isn't into the drama of it all. But I mean, perhaps that's a pipe dream. And then past that, I mean, I want to make a meditational record of some sort. But I have to learn to meditate properly first, or else it's just going to be bullshit. So,
yeah,
Any
plans for Z3, Z cubed?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe, not yet though.
I've noticed with Ziltoid and the concepts of your records, Casualties, you're a good storyteller. Do you think you could ever do that outside of the context of music?
I don't think so. It's been very difficult for me to write coherent stories. Something like Syncastra or Casualties is easy because it's avant-garde and doesn't really have a practical trajectory. It can go anywhere. And the first Ziltoid was easy because it was just absurd, right? But Z2 was really difficult, and I had to include my buddy and like run the story past a bunch of people, and because it's not interesting to me to write stories. It's not really what I'm about. So I think that any stories that I write in the future will be by proxy rather than, And if there's a Z3, I mean, I have no idea what I would do with that at this point. I happily banished Ziltoid, so,
Out to the moon in Casualties.
So he can stay there for a while.
You've got a book coming out with Rocket 88. What was it called?
It's called Only Half There.
Okay, and it's like a half autobiography, half how you write, sort of thing?
Yeah, it's yeah, I'd say that's a fair description. I spent a long time on that fucking thing, man. Like, because I do the thing where I dictate it to somebody and then they wrote it down, and that took 6 months, and then he finally was like, "Okay, well, I finished the book and I need you to proofread it." And I read it and I was like, "Oh, I hate this. This is not what I want to say." It's, he included all the ums and the whatevers, and I sound like a teenager, and my career arc is such that you compound that type of writing with what my career has been, it just sounds ridiculous. So I rewrote the first paragraph, and I haven't written since grade 12. But it was much better.
Yeah.
but it still wasn't great. So I rewrote the whole thing. I rewrote it from scratch, and that took another 6 months. Like, I mean, I wrote the book.
Mm-hmm.
And then it got edited, and then, people read it, and it's just like, well, my grammar sucks. And so it's like I'm trying to relearn about grammar and all this sort of stuff. And then we had to get the photos, and we had to get the artwork, and then the artist quit, and then the photos we had to get rights for. And then I went to Iceland and recorded an EP that was like a lot more stripped down. And, and when I don't have the opportunity to like put echo on things and auto-tune myself, it's like it sounds so naked, and I was super uncomfortable with that. And then they wanted to do a cassette, but it's finished, and it's wordy and obtuse in a lot of ways, but I think it's really good, and I think it has a point to make, and I think that it's a worthy read. So it's finished, and it's it's very uninhibited, which is not the place that I like to reside.
Yeah.
A lot. But I think in a sense it can, and I gotta run, I'm sorry, but it's like, I think if my objectives are to help, I think this book is quite helpful.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. You've given me a solid hour. Honestly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for
more than welcome.
Coming out here and for doing this.
Yeah, you helped us out. You got us into the Maple Leaf Lounge, and my wife and son really enjoyed their breakfast. So
good.
It's the least I can do, man.
I'm glad they did. It's a pleasure hanging out with you and talking to you.
You too, buddy.
I hope it wasn't a drag for you.
It wasn't. I got to go down the street here, so I'm going to go pee and
all right.
And do that.
Thank you guys for listening, and
thank
bye-bye.
you guys.